Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. This is the application security news this week. So, with that, I hope some of you don't have, especially if you're Android.
Sorry, Keith, you're breaking up there.
Oh,
sorry.
Am I still good?
Yeah, repeat that last sentence.
Sure. Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. I am your host, Keith Hoodlet, joined by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian. Paul, welcome back.
I like how the illustrious has worked its way into the vernacular.
Well, you were prescient earlier, so I mean, I'm sure that you've got quite a few. I'm going to find quite a few ways to describe you, I think, in the course of this series, Paul. So,
that scares me a lot, just so you know.
What can we say? What can we say? So, one of the things that I pulled out this week that I thought was really interesting is Chromecast, as well as Google Home, is apparently causing Wi-Fi routers to basically crash internally, or at least receive some sort of denial of service for users of Android phones, which to me is, especially because it looks like it's affecting SOHO routers, small office, home office. It does not seem very good for a look on their cross device interactions. What do you think, Paul? You're big into the IoT space. Do you have a Chromecast?
I bought one and I never really used it because it was kind of weird. When I bought it, you had to like go on your phone and you could like cast to it. If this is like way off topic, but if you get, but it's of interest to our listeners because they ask us all the time to do a segment on it and we haven't yet. If you get a like NVIDIA Shield device or any kind of Android TV, it's essentially Android, which means you can cast to it from really any application, audio or video. Even if you can't, like it's Android, so you can just put all the same apps you have on your phone right on your TV. Now, these devices cost a little more. They're like $200 roughly, but I find they're the best entertainment devices and well worth the money. So some of these kind of weird features with the Chromecast, like I don't get. I get it because they're cheap, right? You can get a Chromecast really cheap, and that's cool. But that really had nothing to do with the vulnerability, but kind of interesting tidbits.
No, it is interesting in the sense that it's almost like you get what you pay for, right? So what it looks to be happening in this situation is if you have a home where someone in that home has an Android device, it doesn't necessarily need to be in a device that's trying to cast to the Chromecast, for example, or the Google Home. But if you have one of them, what will happen is the longer that device has been asleep, when it wakes up and it's on the same network as a Chromecast or a Google Home device, it almost is like that device is preparing itself to receive an Android cast of whatever it is you were going to share. As a result, what has happened is effectively that device will send something upwards of 10,000 plus packets over the multicast discovery packets as an MDNS, which will cause your local router to effectively either fail open in the case of now suddenly it's like a switch or a hub, I should say, or fail closed and simply just not work. So Google has identified this issue and is actually looking to now fix this with some firmware that Linksys and TP-Link are going to be pushing to their home routers to deal with this problem appropriately, because it looks like they simply weren't handling the MDNS multicast discovery packets appropriately.
Interesting. What else we got?
One that I thought was interesting, and I was going to mention it on last night's Paul Security Weekly, but I wanted to hold off, was Facebook seems to know how to track you simply using the dust on your camera from your phone. So one of the things, yeah, I know, crazy, right? They say that they are not currently doing this, that they have no intention of doing this, but in 2014 they filed a patent to be able to do this, and they've now, I think, received that patent where, based on the dust on your phone, they can identify who you are, kind of like a fingerprint, and then based on the pictures that you take, they can identify where you're around. So now if Facebook's suddenly accessing your camera for one reason or another, as most people give access to Facebook because they want to share photos and what have you, they can suddenly track where you are because they can actually see it. They know who you are based on that dust on your phone, which is insane.
Doesn't the dust on your phone change?
I would imagine so, but based on the times that you upload photos, it can tell kind of, those changes over time. So it might be a little bit delayed per se, but if it knows the photos that you're uploading and it can identify the dust, that fingerprint is probably going to say not necessarily static, but similar or close to. And they've come up with a way that they can go ahead and identify who you are based on that dust and then where you are or who you're around based on the pictures you're taking, which is crazy, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's pretty
just
frightening.
one more way that they're tracking you. Um, Sticking with interesting news that is more security related, uh, I thought that this is kind of a continuation of our series of people want to mine cryptocurrency, and it looks like Minecraft German webpage Minecraft.de was hacked, and guess what? They installed a CoinHive miner on that page for a few hours, and to everyone's surprise, really no one's surprise, people just kind of shrugged. They're like, "Okay, you put CoinHive on a German Minecraft forum. Congratulations." But it's I don't know, Paul, with all the news that you've seen lately, doesn't this seem just kind of reminiscent of the way that we're going, where people are now hacking to install a CoinHive miner?
Yeah, and I think we covered that last night too. And it's interesting now that we've been analyzing this field long enough, we can see the trends of attackers and how they monetize and their intent. And they'll always go to largely where the money is or where they think they can make the most profit. And right now, today, that a lot of that is mining cryptocurrency. So not surprising. And if you want a pretty fast server with good bandwidth, a Minecraft server is probably a pretty good target.
For sure, for sure, and especially if they're going after forum users right now, it makes you wonder. Okay, if the forum was breached and they were able to get code execution or code written into that forum itself, what else could they have done with it? Which is also interesting as well from the perspective of this whole Spectre meltdown attack, right? Like we know that JavaScript, or at least if you haven't patched your browser, those vulnerabilities are executable via JavaScript. And if you can insert JavaScript such as CoinHive into a page, like at some point that is going to become a reliable attack vector for somebody, which is why I think people like Oracle have patched VirtualBox against Meltdown Inspector, which is pretty awesome, especially given how fast they responded to this.
Yeah, forum software just loves to have vulnerabilities because
Right.
you have to accept too much data from the user, and there's just no way to protect it all.
Yep,
It's really
absolutely.
difficult to protect it all. Although Reddit seems to have gotten it right. And if we had to do a forum today, I would certainly just spin up Reddit threads, subreddits, whatever the cool people call it.
I think it's subreddits. You're right. And honestly, I don't use Reddit all that much myself, but yeah, I mean, to the extent that they seem to have done a good job of cleaning inputs and doing good sanitization. I mean, they've dealt with a lot of the problems that we were just discussing in the top 10 and in the top 10 last week as well. So it's interesting though, if you think about it, right? Reddit is an organization that is probably fairly lean from a employee standpoint, but at the same time, they're a technology company and
Yeah.
their sole business is based on a website. So of course they're going to do everything right in that regard. Whereas, with WordPress, maybe. I mean, it's written in PHP, so it can't be. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to throw shade on WordPress. They work hard.
It's
And
always
WordPress,
interesting to use Oracle and patches in the same sentence in a headline because
yeah,
you never quite know where it's going to go. I know that their hardware platforms, it was under they haven't really responded to if they're going to fix their hardware platform, but it sounds like they're fixing VirtualBox for Meltdown Inspector.
yeah, and that's definitely a good thing. And it's funny that you mentioned that too with Oracle patching as well, because quite frankly, that work is never done. You will always be patching Oracle something,
Always.
whether it's Java or otherwise. So continue with the patchery from Oracle. Also in patch news, Lenovo is patching a network operating system vulnerability that dates back to 2004. Looks like in this case, they actually ended up having a hard-coded password in their a product that they actually ended up purchasing way back when. But in this case, basically, it's an authentication bypass as HP backdoor. So I think that this is related to some technology that they purchased from HP for a while ago when they spun out of IBM. And as a result, this backdoor has existed for now 14 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. It came from Nortel Networks. Haven't heard that name in a long time because it's been defunct for a
Right.
while.
So yeah. In fact, at the very bottom of the article, it covers just that. Intentionally added in 2004 by Nortel at the request of its OEM customer,
Yeah.
and then affected 16 models of IBM switches and 16 Lenovo switches under the advisory. So if you have Lenovo or IBM switches, get ye to the patchery. Uh, Other interesting news. This one it hasn't been covered in most other outlets as of yet, but it's a really good article called related to a piece of malware called Trisis, which is only the fifth known vulnerability, or I should say, attack tooling to go after ICS devices. And it's, I think, only the second or third that's intended to be destructive in nature. And in this case, second or third to Stuxnet, and I think it was either Flame or Dooku was the other one. But effectively, what has happened is a Saudi company, specifically oil and gas company, that is a subsidiary of Saudi Aramco, was attacked by this thing called, now being dubbed Trisis. And what it did, or what it was intended to do, was attack the security or the safety functionality of some of these things like centrifuges, where those have like a safety valve or a shutoff that happens based on certain rotation speeds. And rather than in the way that Stuxnet attacked the uranium centrifuges by causing it to spin up very quickly and spin down, but fake the logs, this was simply meant to turn off that safety functionality and then encourage the centrifuges to run faster. So it almost wasn't really trying to hide the fact that it was trying to be malicious. It was simply trying to prevent anyone from really knowing that something was going wrong, which I thought was very, very interesting. And this has been something that is now under review, I think, by Mandiant was the company that was brought in to look at this. And the only way that this is actually known publicly was because at one point, there's claims in the article that someone from Mandiant uploaded portions of this to VirusTotal and then quickly took it down. But of course, once it's on VirusTotal, somebody grabbed it. And since then, it has been under heavy scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, not surprising that attack tools exist for this and come to light, certainly.
Yeah. And I mean, to the extent that the interconnectivity of devices and especially like on the networks, for example, this thing is scary from the perspective of it's meant specifically to be damaging, and whether or not this was a test bed or an actual attack remains to be seen. Because the other attack that I'm thinking of now that was intended to be destructive was against Ukraine last year, or it might have been 2016, regarding the blackout of power or the electricity grid, for lack of a better term. So, yeah, Black Energy 2 is the one that I'm thinking of there. So it is definitely a situation where we're likely to see more of this, and we're likely to see more of this in places that perhaps right now don't matter. But I wonder if this is a little bit of saber rattling from probably nation states that are saying, look, we can do this, so back off on XYZ policy, for example.
Sorry.
Speaking of,
speaking dying over here.
Don't do that, Paul. We need you for this show. It's not allowed, at least not on Application Security Weekly. We have 5 nines, Paul. Uptime is important.
Got it.
So the last one for bugs, breaches, and more is specifically the Hawaii ballistic missile alert that went out, I believe it was last Saturday. The interesting thing about all of this, and I think that this is once again going to become a common theme on Application Security Weekly, is the way that this happened was effectively due to a bad user interface. I don't know if you happen to get a chance to look at the picture of this, but I mean, 1997 called and it wants its website back. So to have simple links as a way to test versus actually issue alarm systems, especially of this nature where it could cause mass hysteria, for lack of a better term, seems a little scary. And it seems like the whole, not only nuclear arsenal, but the alerting and warning systems that we have here in the United States probably due for an update.
Yeah. That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
And
Some people are speculating.
What was it in the interface that? So
if you look at, in this case, they have, it's the PACOM CDW. So on this particular picture, which Honolulu Civil Beat has actually been reporting back that this was a representation of the user interface, is what they're
Mm-hmm.
now saying. I don't know if that's actually, if someone gave them the real thing, they said, oh yeah, no, that's the fake. This is actually what it looks like instead. But effectively here, the PACOM or PACOM CDW state only and drill PACOM CDW state only are two different lines. Drill versus normal is, misclicking that is probably pretty easy to do when you do it 3 times a day, because this apparently
Yeah.
happened during a shift change. Um,
Oh, I see.
you'd think that maybe just a little bit of CSS to have red and green, or
Yeah,
some
right.
anything, right? Anything that could differentiate these two would have been nice. But that bad user interface leads to otherwise bad security or even public panic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is going to be a theme. So security practitioners and developers out there, when you're thinking about how you're going to design that user interface, think about how it could be misinterpreted or go wrong simply by someone reading too fast. Or maybe they were looking at their phone when they were clicking on things, right? Um, definitely plan for this and use some CSS, maybe.
Yeah.
So in other news, more Intel issues, Paul. What do you think about the Intel AMT security issues continuing to roll out? Do you remember? I think it was Tavis Ormandy last year said Intel AMT had some bad bugs, and people were freaking out about it because they thought it was remotely exploitable for login bypasses.
Yeah, and I think what we found is that the firmware with a lot of these subsystems is really not taking advantage of a lot of modern techniques to prevent traditional buffer overflows even. And a lot of that's coming to light. There are multiple subsystems within Intel, as well as the regular processor chips, obviously, with Meltdown Inspector, that are vulnerable to a varying number of attacks. We've seen, even just the beginning of 2018, the release of a whole slew of bugs that are in this family of vulnerabilities with vulnerabilities on the chip. And this has certainly been the year of, so far, this style of vulnerability really being big in the public disclosure realm.
And we actually, last week, we covered something with AMD regarding just this as well, where it had some vulnerabilities on a subsystem that was released publicly, or at least had finally been released publicly if it was under embargo beforehand. And based on Paul's Security Weekly last night, Larry was sharing with us that there are at least 2 more in this class of vulnerabilities that are under embargo, but already have names and logos. So I think 2018 is shaping up to be a year of the hardware vulnerabilities. Nothing is safe.
Right.
Speaking of safe, though, and this is kind of under the "if you build it, they will come for your data" section, I want to definitely highlight the whole problem of, if you collect it, think about, firstly, how you're storing it, and secondly, what it could be used for. So in the case of in this recently, came to light where Apple is handing the Chinese government effectively its iCloud management in China, and that's because Chinese laws say you need to have all of the Chinese citizens' data in China. So now, depending on the way that the data is stored, depending on what is actually collected and pushed into iCloud, users of iPhones in China could be presenting their government with information that they really don't want to be giving them. So to the extent that you got to think about what you collect, or in the words of, I don't know if it was Josh Corman, but it was certainly some folks in our industry that have said, if you collect it, you must protect it. And yeah, now we're seeing situations where simply thinking about that is definitely a design problem that you have to be considerate of before you push things to production.
I just do it in production. That's my whole
I know
mantra.
you do, Paul. And quite frankly, I'm sure your developers cringe just a little bit when you sit down at the editor.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that's interesting, sticking with Apple, is they actually have some of the health data that's stored by your phone, I think, from the iPhone 6s onward, that is actually being used in a murder trial. So again, this is a situation where we have data collected by a device that you normally keep on you that is now being used in a murder trial where in Europe, an individual who has allegedly murdered another individual, a university student, the data that was collected on their phone said that they were doing some sort of strenuous activity like climbing stairs, and this individual has refused to give details of the actual event itself, but has pled guilty. And so what they ended up doing is the police officers or the detectives went and basically mimicked the way that they believed the event took place, using like similar like fake weighting and what have you, to see if the data set matched to what was found on the phone for that user. And lo and behold, it did. So it's again an interesting situation of you might be collecting this information for benign purposes. You might think it's private because it's a device you own and you carry around with you and you've stored in some secure way, whether it's with a PIN code, for example. That doesn't mean it can't or won't be used against you, even if it's not necessarily accurate. But if it can be portrayed as accurate, that's enough from a law perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And Paul, I mean, you've got a number of devices as well, not only from your phone, but all of your IoT devices. Is it ever a situation that you get concerned about what is your fridge telling Samsung about you?
Yeah, sure. That's always a concern, and I think we could all probably be more diligent about what gets out of our network and what we can control that we give to various IoT device manufacturers. Certainly, that's always a concern. However, with the new IoT devices, we're lucky if they work. So most of the time, there's so many bugs that they're probably not able to collect anything reliably anyway at this time. But that is certainly a concern.
True. Unless, of course, their developers are pushing to master with those new updates to start Skynet. So
yes.
Waits to be seen. But speaking of how we're going to fight back against Skynet, Javad Malik has written a really nice article on dark reading about mental models and security and how to think like a hacker. So for a lot of developers and people that are curious about security but don't necessarily live in this world in a kind of everyday lifestyle, the 7 different ideas or mental models that Javad has put together here are actually really good. So concepts like inversion or fighting against confirmation bias, I thought were really good. Of course, he had to have Occam's razor in there, which I think is important from an engineering perspective as well as from a security perspective. Are there any of these that jump out at you, Paul, as being somewhat interesting for thinking like a hacker, having done pen testing yourself?
I haven't read the article yet. I know Yavid pretty well. He's a great guy, but I haven't read the article yet. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's fine. So the 7 that he has is inversion, confirmation bias, circle of competence, which he actually highlights to like a person saying, okay, like I am ignorant of this. Was Paul, you just said like I haven't read this article, which is your circle of competence is you didn't read the article. Like you're acknowledging that. Whereas if you were ignorant of the fact that you hadn't read the article and then just kind of kept going with it, is what he's talking about for number 3. Which I think is really interesting from especially a team building exercise, right? Like recognizing your team's strengths and weaknesses when you're hiring out new individuals to shore up those competencies accordingly. He also covers Occam's razor. So the idea with the least amount of assumptions is usually the one from a competing hypothesis standpoint that should be collected. And then second order thinking, which I think gets to what we were just talking about with collection of data, which is if I do one thing, what will happen thereafter? So if I collect health data, how could that health data then be used in a way that's potentially malicious, right? So it's taking the first thought of if I do X, my immediate outcomes are anticipated as follows. What are the outcomes that happen as a result of those? So I thought that was a really good idea as well from a, for example, deserialization perspective. If I sanitize and serialize in this way, and the output is this, what are the potential output vulnerabilities that exist as a result of the way that I have serialized and then deserialized it, for example? Which is a good representation of a thought experiment. So taking the whole concept of a tabletop, which we talked about last week on Pulse Security Weekly, as well with Diana, I think it was Diana Kelly and Ed Moyle, about tabletop exercises. So taking the whole concepts and working through them as a team. And then, of course, probabilistic thinking. So Bayesian updating, which I thought was good. So go read the article when you get a chance. I thought it was really good and pretty useful. I know that we're probably getting ready to wrap up here, Paul. So I want to actually get your thoughts on the How to Build a Horse with Programming, which is a comic that I included in today's show notes because I thought it was funny.
It's funny, and the first comic is just pretty horrifying. just you'll have a mental image burned in your brain when you. I won't spoil it for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate. Pretty accurate.
So I won't reveal the comics. I'll leave that to our readers to go check out the notes wiki.securityweekly.com under Application Security Weekly Episode 2. But the languages that they cover on how to build a horse with programming is C++, Java, JavaScript, NoSQL, COBOL, Lisp, C#, Assembly, and probably one of my favorites, PHP.
I think the PHP one might be my favorite. You built a Trojan horse, and it releases hundreds of tiny horses to punish you every day forever.
Thus is the legacy of all PHP programs.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's a good note to end on. Reminder about PHP.
Right. So, Paul, feel free to take us out.
Yes, Keith, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Application Security Weekly. We'll see you next time.